Welcome to a new episode of Product Directions Podcast, 100 Product Strategies. We are your insider access to top product leaders shaping the strategy of the most diverse industries today. I'm your host, Nacho Basino, and I'll be digging into the real-life situations, problems, and frameworks used for strategy with product people all around the world in all kinds of products and markets. While there is no recipe for success, listening to others' experiences may give you the edge you need to solve your next strategic challenge. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode. I'm today with Simone, who is an executive director at the Foundation for Social Change, which is a non-profit organization, and previously has an extensive career in product leadership, for example, as CPO at Click Renewables, and before that, as product director at PayPayPhone. Simone, welcome to the show.
Hi, how's it going?
Doing great. So maybe before we jump into our typical strategic topics, I would like to know a bit more about yourself. Can you share with the audience who you are, what you have been doing lately, and maybe some insights on the companies you work at?
Yeah, I guess my career in tech and product stuff started many years ago, maybe like 16, 17 years ago. Back in the day when job titles were all made up and there was like websites or something, I don't know, I can't remember at the time. But I started in tech many years ago, and when I was living in the UK, and then I moved over to Canada. So I know my accent isn't British or it's not Canadian either. And I moved to Canada, and I got a job actually in gambling. So I worked in gambling and building websites and things like that back in the day, and it was right at that point when user-centered design was becoming a thing. And so I learn about user-centered design and just became obsessed by it, and just wanted to learn as much as I possibly can. At that time, the organization, I worked at the British Columbia Lottery Corporation, which is gambling, but for the government. So it's a little bit different here in Canada how it's set up. And at that time, when you were building something and designing something for a customer, it was pretty much, what does the technology do? And then, you just build everything around the technology and the constraints that you get. So when I kind of learned about user-centered design, I just, oh my God, this is the way. Everyone needs to change towards this. So I actually formed the first user experience team at BCLC and built up the discipline, and moved. Actually, I worked in gambling for a decade, in different roles. And my last job there was actually heading up innovation, where I was focusing on all the new games and experiences for new customers across the organization, which was super fun. And then that's really kind of, I became closer and closer to the strategy and direction of the organization in that role, and became very heavily involved in product strategy and all that type of stuff. And that's my segue into moving into mobility and over at PayByPhone. So I became the director of product at PayByPhone for the consumer experience. And so I worked there for almost 2 years, and then and that was fun. And another really interesting experience of just got acquired, rapid growth, build out the team, do a million things all at once, international expansion, oh, crap, our infrastructure can't support it. Stop, go do something else. And so that was kind of fun and interesting. And so I did that for a couple of years. But I just got to a point in that job that I just felt like, I need to be doing something more for the world. I just felt deep down a gut reaction that I wanted to do something that felt like I was making a difference every day. So I actually left that gig and went and worked in renewables. And so I worked at Clear Renewables I started out there as the director of product. And again, it was a startup, 65 people, and, I kind of started there. We were going through an acquisition deal, and that fell through. And then it was Series B, and then went through Series B, lots of money, growth, and so I became the CPO there in short order, and built out the team, and so that was the whole thing. I was there for 2 years, and once again, again, it kind of always felt like, I was in the renewable space. So I kind of was like, yeah, climate change, fine. But, ultimately the conversations you're having every day are really just they're a lot about money, and so, I worked there for a couple of years and left. When I left that organization, took a break and did some reflection and thought, like, what do I really want to be doing with my energy and time? And I was already kind of sussing out. I was like, okay, maybe I just want to have more influence and become CEO in an organization that I really believe in and care about, and still stay in the product world. But I ended up found this amazing organization called Foundations for Social Change that's actually kind of really trying to innovate the social sector, and a lot of the way that things are, all the services offered for vulnerable populations. And I thought, oh, well, that's awesome. I can actually help humanity and not throw away my whole career in the process. So it felt pretty like a good fit. And so I started there just about 4 months, end of September, I guess, and as the executive director. And so kind of new challenge, they're like, what do we want to be when we grow up? Where do we go? Yeah. So everyone keeps asking me about how, your job must be so different now, but it's actually there's a lot of things that are really similar, a lot of things that are a lot easier, a lot of things that are really difficult and hard, but it's all people at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. I'm good at people, so kind of feels good. It feels like the right spot to be. It's nice.
Perfect. That's a very interesting journey, by the way. So I'm sure that we will dig some interesting stories along the way. So maybe I can actually start with the kind of the typical opening question, which is asking you about some strategy experience that you want to share with us. So I'm sure if this will be clear renewables or more recent or more past experience, but basically the question is, when you were going through this strategy creation process, how the steps look like, what type of tools you use, or some kind of walk through that creation process for the strategy.
Oh man, okay. Maybe I'll start by saying I think the interesting insight is that every single time I've done it is kind of a little bit different, but there is a theme. My common theme, I would say, is that I always keep things simple. So it's like anytime product strategy documents are these like massive multi-page things, and like, to be honest, I can't take it. I just can't take it. Always like a less is more kind of a person. So I love a good canvas, so I think the best framework, I guess, and structure that I've used for product strategy is the Product Strategy Canvas by ProduxLabs. I love it. I think it's awesome. It just breaks down. It's super simple. Vision. What is the challenge? What's your target condition, which is really your measures of breaking smaller challenges, and then what your current state is. And I think the mix of that is it's just like a one-page canvas that I've used many, many times, and I think it just rocks. Like, it's awesome, and then within that, again, I'm very visual. I come from a design background, right? So anything that I can visualize, I always lean on. So I love it, when you're breaking down using opportunity trees and getting those into Miro. So a very collaborative person. So I like to bring my team along when I'm doing things. Yeah. And so anything that I can do to kind of visualize stuff is, I always default to that. But I would say one of the things that, if I was living in a vacuum, and where I'm the only influencer, that's how I like to work, but often with product strategy, it doesn't work like that, right?
Hopefully never. But
yeah, like the ideal versus reality are two very, very different things, And I think coming into different organizations in my career, there's, at BCLC is government, right? Totally different space. Much more about the documents of strategy documents, and it's sometimes you're creating a strategy is taking months, months. Like this, it's not an easy thing. So, and then you go into the startup world where they're literally surviving, right? It's just like, just do it, make a decision, move on, and so everything in between I've worked within. So ideal versus reality. I think you got to pick your battles, and you've got to know your audience, know who your influencers are, and know when to let go. And I think that's just like it's like a marriage, right?
Yeah.
Journey, the journey towards it rather than the thing that you use. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, you got my attention. I have two very interesting different paths to pursue. So the canvas I will probably defer for later. But regarding government, when you think about doing strategy for government, what would you say are the major differences? So I'm assuming there is a lot of politics and buy-in needed. Is this the case, or are you, for example, receiving input for that strategy?
The biggest difference is a level of risk tolerance, right? That's
like near zero, I can imagine.
Well, it's not real. Like I was lucky, like in some government organizations for sure, right? Like if you were in a ministry that's working with, children that had high risk kids, right? Your level of risk is very low. Like you cannot take risks. I was lucky. I worked in the government for gambling. So it's actually kind of a very interesting mix of you ultimately creating entertainment for the province, but also you have a public. The public is the one that's putting scrutiny on you about where you're spending money, what you're doing with it, everything. So I would say that the government, definitely working in the government, it's probably the lowest risk tolerance for sure. So you have to cover your ass more. But also, I would say the risk, but also the level of success you have. Like gambling, we were making billions of dollars every year profit. So, how fast you want to go and how quick you need to make decisions is really, I think, tied to how successful your current business model is. So gambling, if you're doing really well, you still want to drive change, and strategies about change. What is the change you want to have in your organization? And so in the government, if you are already succeeding, I think there is a little bit more like a tolerance for taking your time with things. And it's like, okay, you've got time, you've got this. Whereas when you're in a startup, when I was in like in Clear, for example, if you've got a runway that's much shorter, like you got to just make a decision, get the information, you got to go. So like those differences in the culture, risk tolerance, the speed in which you have to make decisions and all that type of stuff has a huge part to play in how you approach your strategy.
Yeah, perfect. And maybe going back to that, when you're thinking, so you have more time to make decisions. Probably the strategy has a longer time horizon because you can take more time to actually deliver on things. But in terms of, for example, researching the information, preparing the information, what are some differences or some ways to collect information necessary for strategy creation in a government, for example, or can be even a large enterprise?
What's quite interesting as well, I think maybe I missed something, which is also about the size of the organization. Because I think the other reason why you have to take more time on the government side or a larger corporation is you've got to bring more people along, right? Whereas if you're in a smaller startup, you might just have a handful of leaders that you've got to get aligned in a direction. Or you all might make a decision, we're going to take a risk with this, and you can leave that one room, that one meeting, and all be aligned. Whereas if you're in this large, huge organization, that's a little harder to do when you've got to go and try to convince the government to agree to your strategy, right? So you got scrutiny put on it.
But I mean, related to that, the level of I'm calling it information, but the proof about the strategy you want to pursue that you need to have, I assume is greater. So maybe what when we're thinking about formulating the strategy, and you mentioned, for example, the canvas, so it's an easy way to simplify the final result of the strategy, I would say.
Yeah.
What type of information were you collecting kind of behind the strategy to support the strategy and to convince this big round of people that this was already the strategy versus others that may be out there?
Yeah. Okay, I understand. Well, are you talking like in the government?
Yeah, just to pick an example.
Oh, well, I say that. In the startup, in my startup world, a lot of times the information doesn't exist yet. So there's way more, making a hypothesis and experimenting. And that's, again, I kind of want to, I think a lot of times in these podcasts, people don't speak about the real messiness of strategy, right? Because, I mean, in an ideal world, you would be able to say, you'd leave a room and be like, okay, we don't know this answer. So therefore, we're going to first do an experiment, and then we're going to collect that information. And then next, step A, step B, step B. It doesn't, I don't know, maybe someone else is just like so much better at this than I am. But in reality, in my world, it doesn't work like that, because it's people. It's a people thing. If you were not working with people all the time, you'd probably, again, live in this lovely vacuum and do whatever you want. But because people also have parts to play, like, the CEO, if he's getting put under pressure from his shareholders, then sometimes you don't have the runway to be able to, and you need that answer right now. And so you need to make or he has to make that, or she, or they have to make that knee-jerk reaction. And so that's going to have an impact on all of your plans that you ever put in. So that's why I feel like, knowing who your customers are, first and foremost, is like so critical. So if there's anything that I'm ever going to prioritize, if there's a gap in an understanding of a customer needs, you got to fight for that. At least talk to like 2-3 people. Like, at the very least, you got to fight. Time I haven't fought for that and I've let it go, it's always been a mistake. Always, every single time. And so there would be, but if there's a metric that might be missing, and if there is a massive, significant amount of urgency because of the context, either the political context or the shareholder context or anything like that, you've got to be pragmatic at the end of the day. Like, you really do. I believe in this, like, the world is not so linear and like precise and perfect, and I don't know everything. And I think the most important thing is just asking a lot of questions and the reasons why, and if the why to not do something the way that you want to do it, if it makes sense, and you can mitigate the risks in another way, then or you say to your CEO, look, are you prepared to lose money on this? Are you, like, honestly, it's your call at the end of the day, but are you prepared to lose money on this? And if they say yes, it's at the end of the day, sometimes their company, right?
Yeah. So. Good point. So maybe going back to the canvas that you mentioned at the beginning, and switching tracks for a second here. I totally see why or how the canvas can simplify the view of the strategy. But as you were saying, the messiness that underlies this canvas that looks super nice and simple, it's not really that doesn't match the simplicity that you can see there. So how do you usually or do you have a process or steps in mind to fill these canvases, or some I'm assuming that you just don't throw this and kind of gather everyone in a room and start writing on it, but maybe you kind of gather information, you decide on the trade-offs that may be out there, or as you said, clarify the customer needs. How this will look like in I don't know, for example, a past example at Clear Renewables.
Yeah, I would say that you're always going to do a little bit of the upfront, like, dare I say, waterfall-y kind of work, where you're kind of, this is our end of year and we're going to do a strategy for the next year and all the rest of it. And then, I'll normally do kind of quarterlies. We'll do like quarterly check-ins, I guess. And so they're kind of like, I guess, the bulk of the work, where you're actually putting together the inputs of that. Okay, collecting data and doing all the rest of it, that will feed into it. But again, I would say maybe I'll back up and say that the reason why I like to keep things simple is because they do change often, and I hate wasting my time. So I'd rather just like do enough so we can have enough of the direction for the team. And so it's not like I've spent days and days and weeks doing something that then is going to change the following week. So I think keeping things simple, it kind of leaves a little bit more freedom and room to kind of like, and move around a little. But definitely I normally am doing annual planning and quarterly planning each, and that's when the massive amount of input and the data collection comes in. So my product managers, for example, are bringing their input into that, So we're doing a kind of collection from all the different product managers, and obviously from the leadership team as well. So actually, it's really quite interesting, because I know we've talked about product strategy, and my current job is like, oh, it's not really product, but I take, if there's any job I've had the luxury of a little bit of a vacuum, it's because I'm right. It's actually quite nice, and I think that I use so much of the work that I've done in my product background in this new job. So I came into this new job, completely new sector, never done it before, and again, like, one of the really interesting, unique things about this sector, even compared to any job I've ever worked in, is how focused they are about their customer and the population they're trying to serve. Like, it's just so, they know so much about them, but they never have any, they never like fall down on their own, like they know best. It's always like bring them along, And so it's just like a big thing, a theme across the social sector, like bringing your, either lived experience of your population along with your decisions you're making in the organization. But coming into this organization, it's a lot of it is I've been looking about where I want to take, what the vision of the organization is, and the challenges that I see, and how to secure money, right, to actually build the programs and services. Why isn't it the government's giving us money right now? How can I expand that? Okay, well, what are the metrics that we have out there? What's actually for-profit sectors doing that we can learn from? And so we don't really have competitors, but I look at the other industries, other for-profit spaces for inspiration about the competitive landscape, and then try and take that into my organization. And so it's kind of a very, very similar thing that you're doing. Inputs I was telling you about on the kind of annual quarterly planning, again, you're looking at your needs, your market out there, you're looking at your customer needs, you're looking at what you're trying to do, you're looking at your competitors, you're looking at your metrics and whether all the current work that you've got going on is working, and you're taking all those in, again, making assumptions of what you think you're going to do differently. So very similar. Oh, sorry, Nacho.
No, but I think that's a very good point, because that's what I'm trying to get to, is that you have this, as a result, this simple canvas, but you have all this messiness underlying the process. So, for example, all these inputs that you're collection, do they live somewhere? Do you keep them on your head, or in the head of, for example, the past company in product managers' heads? Or is this kind of explicitly living in a tool? Where are you trying to summarize this to make decisions?
Yeah, I think in all of my different jobs, it's been different. So, like at BCLC, we had a whole department, right, that did all this lovely stuff for us every quarter. Amazing.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Export the messiness somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly. But even in that, they did. It's always still like data is always a bit messy, right? Because when you've got a lot of it, in where I worked in government, there's always too much of it, and that creates a problem, right? But the fantastic thing is, you could put a request in and say, I want X, Y, and Z pieces of information for my, for my next quarterly cycle or yearly cycle of products. Thank you very much. That's fantastic. And if they don't have, but also in my last job there, I worked in innovation. The reason my whole job existed was because we were trying to tap into customers that were not currently engaging. So there was gaps of understanding of these types of customers. And so the thing I had done to build the product strategy in that organization was to find out, I did a big synthesis of all the research, everything that we knew about this type of customer, and then identified the gaps and kicked off one of the main things was to kick off a research project to understand, fill in the gaps. So that's, even though you might have all the data there's always gaps with that understanding of customers, right? And but you go through that same. Whereas on the other end, maybe a clear example in the startup world, you obviously don't have that access. The startup normally they're sitting on a Confluence page somewhere, so or it is in some people's heads, or it's in 5 different tools that they've purchased over the time, and so with that, when I would one of the last strategy cycles that we had gone through at Clear, it was pretty much like feeding into that input. I had like maybe 10 different people feeding into a 1-page Confluence page that had all these inputs, so I could actually share that with the leadership team when we were doing the strategy development. So it's really different. I guess
That makes sense.
it's not. Is it like? I wish that there was like a magic button, and maybe it's like that would be fantastic, wouldn't it? It would be really, really great.
On the other hand, it seems that the even though it looks different, the underlying theme is that you are collecting information from different sources. Depending on the company type and the resources you have available, that will look different, but that's what you are doing. And maybe my next question related to that is, okay, now you, as you say, you have shared this information, you have it in either one place or one report or whatever, and you need to decide. I mean, you have these kind of interesting trends that kind of we can go this direction, this other direction. We want to be strategic, we want to focus. So how did you experience this selection process in the past?
Yeah, again, very different. Some organizations have, actually, you know what? A tip for anyone doing this, I think, is to have these conversations not in the room. I honestly think if you're going into a lot of times you go have like this, you have a conversation with your leadership team, right? And it's very focused on, making the decisions out of that meeting. But if you haven't actually sat down with everyone, actually given the background context, you never have enough time in the meeting.
Yeah.
Right. And so I would always say to do those things, do the out of room influencing before you the room. And then when you come in the room, if you've done that, you're way better off. You already know who your allies are. You already know, like, it kind of sounds so evil, doesn't it? Oh my God, it sounds like horror. but and you don't get into these like, where everyone's at. Even if your CEO is saying, I don't get it still, I don't understand where you're coming from. Well, at least you can come to that meeting with a different type of information or the gap or the question that he had. Or they had, and so you can be a little more influential in the meeting. Because again, like I've gone through every where you create frameworks, prioritization frameworks. Okay, desirability, viability, feasibility, do all the lovely stuff. Let's do a prioritization 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've done all those things. It always comes down. A lot of times, it comes down to whether they get it or not.
Yeah. There is a kind of, you can bring the data, but it's a perception problem there that you need to fix as well.
No, you're completely right. And so if you can like lead the horse to water a little more and do the work beforehand, you're going to have a better result. And even if you do end up using a framework, to actually do the prioritization, you're going to have the people that you need to prioritize things higher. So it's win-win.
Yeah. And probably at that level, I mean, going back to what you were saying at the beginning, kind of keeping things simple, at that level, probably it's better the simpler the information it is, even though you need to do the prep work of going through that messiness to get there.
Totally. And the other thing is just like the prep, the prep work before the meeting is also helping. It's not just like a one-way thing. It's also hearing where everyone's at, their context. So like, if the sales director is feeling squeezed with sales, that's what he's going to be going into that meeting with. He's going to be carrying if you're going into in the government space when I was working, if you didn't know that if you don't have a business case that is more than $10 million, right? No one's going to listen to you. So you have to understand that context. You can actually go into that meeting with the right information and the right influence and the right everything. So
good point. It's not about the strategy; it's about kind of this stakeholder needs to put the right influences.
It's like you're taking the elements of developing product strategy, which is knowing your customers, knowing what their needs are, knowing what the competitors are, right? You're doing that, but you're taking that into internal team. You're applying it to this internal influencing and change that you're trying to create.
Yeah. Very interesting way of seeing it. One thing that you mentioned that caught my attention is that, you're comparing with the non-profits saying, hey, they know all about their users, and actually for profits should do the same as well at some point. I understand there are differences, but how do you perceive, or do you perceive a difference in strategy creation when it's coming from this, say that the non-profit world more focused on the customer versus when there is a strong sales-driven organization or strong, business organization is driving decisions?
Well, in all honesty, there's different other challenges with it, right? So, I mean, I have to caveat, I've only worked in one nonprofit. I can't say, I feel like I've got a little more, I guess, confidence in the things I'm saying about the nonprofit, the for-profit space. But yeah, in the organization that I'm in now, and all of the community organizations we work with a lot of them. There is always a default to the individual, to the population you're serving, for sure. Like in our organization, for example, having lived experience in the room when we're making decisions. I'm trying to recruit now a board member that has lived experience from our population at so the highest level of like decision making across the whole organization. So it's but with that also, there's other things that are missing, right? Like I think that because there's such a heavy focus on obviously the population that we want to serve and help and all the rest of it, sometimes the money and the business, like the actual what's a business model that's going to be sustainable so we can actually keep bringing in revenue, so we can actually keep our programs and services and all the work that we're doing kind of going, and growing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that, I think, in the social sector isn't necessarily as strong.
Okay.
So, well,
It's trade-off.
it's one of the really interesting, cool things. Me coming into this space, like I'm recognizing very, more people hopefully are going to take the salary hit like me and do this type of work because it's really needed, and like. And also, there's so much to learn. Like, it's fantastic work. Like, I feel it's very intense. It feels really important. Like, very, very important. Like, I've worked in so many different industries, and it's just like every day you feel the impact of your work. Every single day, it's like crazy. And taking a 50% house salary hit did hurt, but it's worth it. It really is. Like pretty cool. And then when you kind of bring in your your background and kind of the business kind of background that you have and product background, it's like you can already see so many like amazing opportunities. Like I'm working on some freaking cool stuff right now. I just like cool. It's very work.
Maybe digging in that direction, and I think you have made some, or at least you try to make some progress when you work in the renewable space. Did you feel it make a difference? And maybe that experience in the renewable space is even more relevant for my question. But do you think it makes a difference when the company has a purpose behind it versus gambling that doesn't seem so purpose driven?
Well, okay, actually, that's really interesting because in gambling, actually incredibly purpose driven because I work for the government. Ultimately, all the money goes back to the province.
Okay, fair enough.
I think purpose is so important. One thing I think is everyone's different, right? Like you're driven by different things and motivated by different things. I realize that I'm really motivated by helping people ultimately. And I think it became a little too disconnected for me.
Mm-hmm.
I was really helping our customer, as a data platform. And so our customer a lot of times we were kind of creating data and insights for decision makers purchasing new assets. So, go and purchase, say, a new farm, like a solar farm, or they were assessing that versus another opportunity. And so it kind of felt a little bit more like the impact was really making more money, right? So it felt less about the kind of human thing that was really important to me. But it's not to say that that's wrong, right? It just wasn't as important. It wasn't right. It wasn't the direct impact I wanted to have personally.
Yeah.
So, but they were still very purpose-driven company. Sure. And there's a reason why I stayed there, right? Like, if I wouldn't have even started in the organization and stayed there. And I still incredibly care about that organization massively. And probably wouldn't if they didn't. What the hell are they doing anyway? But no, they're still very purpose driven. But aligning, finding it's taken me a little like meandering path, but finding where your place is and kind of like aligning the purpose of an organization with your own value systems and all that type of stuff. Like it feels really pretty fantastic. Yeah. But I'm also like, that's another big difference. I'm the boss now, right? So, I mean, when you're setting up an organization, you feel much more influence in the direction of that, which is really quite awesome. Like I love that. There's like an intensity to being like being the one heading up the organization, but also just like there's a very I don't know, freeing kind of part of it as well that you can shape it. So
yeah. But maybe in your role as CPO, I mean, let me give you a background on my train of thoughts.
Yeah.
You have a company that is purpose driven, as clear. The day-to-day may feel disconnected because at the end you are doing a data platform, so it's maybe hard to make a difference. But I assume that the product vision that you may have, which is maybe inspirational, should tie to that purpose. And then the strategy should try to fulfill on the product vision. Is this path clear, or do you feel that? I mean, it's hard to make a strategy that delivers on a purpose-driven vision.
In the clear example, if we're talking about that, it still fits, but because of my default to feeling like I want to make an impact directly in people's jobs, lives, all that type of stuff, I think in hindsight at Clear, I probably came in pushing a bias at times. And in that the customer we would prioritize, for example, And so, like, for example, there was a decision that we had to make around whether we wanted to, we had our purpose and where we wanted to take the organization, but we had a choice that we wanted to make, whether we wanted to focus on people that own wind farms and solar farms, or whether people that operationalize and maintain and, so there was a big, like, fork in the road, really. Okay.
Yeah.
And I would say on the owner side, we ended up taking the owner side, right? Because, with regards to a lot of the insights and data that we were collecting from the platform, that they were the biggest influences. They were not necessarily the ones that were going to take the insights and apply it, but they were the influences that if you could get them on board, they could then influence downstream. Whereas the other angle was to actually make the jobs easier for people to actually operationalize these insights. So then, so very different paths that taken. And I'm totally reflecting in the moment now. I think I definitely, even though I'm quite an analytical, logical person, I probably did have a bias in one side versus the other, And I also am like, I come from a UX background, and I like building products for people and like thinking about the customer journeys and things. And when I looked at the owner, even though the business opportunity felt bigger, but it was unclear what the product was going to be, I think.
Yeah.
And so and whereas I could see it really clearly over on this other side. So, and I think that was probably maybe the start of a little bit of a shift for me, in that, this might not necessarily, it's direction great for the organization. Maybe it's not quite right for where I'm at, and I might not be the right person. So
interesting.
There's it's not, the purpose was still clear and stuff, but there is these choices that end up making that, whether you kind of feel like you might be the right person or not. Yeah.
Good point. I mean, I one of the things I always say is that as a CPO, as any product leadership role, you need to be the evangelizer of the strategy. So if you are not super convinced by it, it's a hard job. So
and you also can't sit there being like, oh, and dissing it. Like, when we made the call, I was very like, okay, I agree and commit. Like
exactly, yeah.
You got to go with it, make it work, and be the champion of it when you leave the room and all the rest of it. Otherwise, it ain't gonna go very well. But it is sometimes hard when you've got a team that really knows you.
Great walkthroughs of many of your experiences. So maybe my usual closing question is what I'm not asking. So some interesting strategy learning that you have along the way that I didn't touch with my questions.
I think as a CPO, I think a big key thing is working close with the CEO.
Mm-hmm.
Like, honestly, like being like literally best friends and lockstep with them. Anytime I've lost that or there's been a little like disconnect or anything, it's always made my job harder. So,
Interesting.
and like just getting to a place of like, was it 5 dysfunctions of a team, right? And, when you haven't, when there's kind of friction or you're not quite in the room with all the key, it's normally there's a rebuilding of trust or something that has to happen. And so you kind of sometimes you're in this like really good place, and then just very quickly you can go back down. And if you don't recognize that that's happened, and so you can course correct, it can sometimes throw all your work that you've done on your product strategy out the window. So I would just be like, I guess what I would say is relationships are so important. Like, just like the foundations of good relationships, so you can have those positive conflict debates and all that type of stuff with your leadership team, and just be real with one another. And if everyone's just real and they come up their true authentic selves, better shit is going to happen. Like, it's when people aren't their true self, they're not being truly honest, they're skirting around things, is when it all goes to crap, I find. So relationships, spend the time in building those relationships with the critical people.
Very good. Very good. Very good. All right. Then I usually close with 2 rapid fire questions. So 1 question, 1 phrase answer. So it's completely different format. But if you're up to it, I can give you my one of my 2 typical questions. And the first one will be, what's some good piece of advice you received early in your career that proved to be useful?
Probably someone that was a coach of mine back in the day. She asked me a question at some point, which is just like, how do you want to show up? And sometimes when I'm not feeling at my best, I ask myself that question. I'm like, how do I want to show up in this meeting? How do I want to show up with my team? How do I want to show up at this strategy meeting or whatever? And I ask myself that before I go into the meeting. Or if I'm feeling like a bit disgruntled with a job or something, I'll normally ask myself that. And it might be like that there's a misalignment of values, or there could be anything. So it's always a nice, powerful question I ask myself, I think. And it's always had me in good stead,
Interesting. Good. And the second one is, you being a visual person, as you mentioned before, what's your most valuable collaboration tool in kind of day-to-day work?
Oh my God. Wow. Oh God. I got to think about this one to make sure I get it right. Honestly, like I was going to say Miro, because I freaking love Miro, but I love Slack. I just love it So I didn't even realize how much I loved it until I didn't have it anymore. And I started in my new organization at Foundations for Social Change, and they did everything through email, like all the communication. And honestly, it took me like 2 days. I was just like, I couldn't take it. I was like, I miss Slack so much.
So, Simone, this has been great, super fun, super valuable. Thanks for everything you shared. Anything else you want to say to the audience, or where they can find you or something like that?
Well, yeah, find me on LinkedIn. Like, always up for a chat with people. I love meeting new people. People are very interested in my career shift, I guess, that I've made. And so I'm very keen to talk about that with anyone and help inspire others to make the shift and help humanity and all the rest. Yeah, give me a shout. And I guess one other tidbit of advice for any product leaders out there, I think this is more not something advice is given to me, but I always tell it to everyone, which always have a right-hand person. Okay,
Simone, thanks so much. We really enjoyed it.
Thanks. See you later.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of 100 Product Strategies, the podcast by Product Direction. You can also follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, or Instagram to get access to free weekly content that helps product people upgrade their skills and become more successful. You can access more material, promotional trainings, and be notified of every episode of the show with Product Directions weekly newsletter. Join thousands of product leaders by registering in productdirection.co.